terms of your research then, what made you want to look at seaweed? I mean, this is dedication. It's 4 years dedication worth of seaweed.
It's been a lot of seaweed.
I can imagine.
One of the professors asked me if I wanted to help him digitize the seaweed herbarium he had. So I did that, and just as I was doing it, I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at this actually.
Hello, Veronica, and welcome to Ph.D. Hard Talk. How are we today?
Hi, thanks. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So today we'll be discussing your research and your research findings and how it potentially helps the normal person like myself. So could you please take us through your research and which university you're in, please?
So I'm currently a PhD student at University College Dublin in Ireland, and I work on the ecology of seaweeds on artificial structures. So artificial structures, things like seawalls, breakwaters, stuff that we as humans have put onto the coast.
Right.
And so these structures generally don't really support a lot of biodiversity, a lot of marine life, just because of their characteristics. So we're looking into ways to help them support more marine life, make them more natural.
Okay.
And seaweeds in particular are a good way to do this, because whenever you increase the abundance or the diversity of seaweeds, you increase everything else, because everything else eats seaweeds or lives in seaweeds.
Okay. I like seaweed. I really like snacking on it. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very good.
I'm helping.
You absolutely are.
So in terms of seaweed then, are there different types of seaweed, or is it just one type for each sea?
So there are loads of different types. There's lots of different species, but the main kind of distinction between them is we call them red seaweeds, green seaweeds, and brown seaweeds. Okay. And it's not necessarily because they're red, green, or brown. It's because of the
you read my
chemicals
mind
that they haven't.
I was like, yes, I've seen the red, I've seen the brown, and the green too.
Well, some of them are. Some of the red seaweeds are red, but some of the brown seaweeds are red too. We call them that because of the chemicals inside them that they use to absorb light, pigments. So red seaweeds will absorb a lot more towards the blue end of the spectrum. And so they can, for example, they can live deeper in the ocean because that's mostly blue light penetrates that deep.
Oh, that is interesting. So in terms of your research then, what made you want to look at seaweed? I mean, this is dedication. It's 4 years dedication worth of seaweed. You know, I'm just trying to understand your train of thought there.
It's been a lot of seaweed.
I can imagine.
Well, when I started, I was doing my undergraduate in Malta, and Malta's got a lot of sea. It's 90% of what we've got, and a lot of the research at the University of Malta and the Department of Biology is marine. It's based on the sea, and I was just trying to figure out what to do with my life one summer, and one of the professors asked me if I wanted to help him digitize the seaweed herbarium he had. He had a lot of seaweeds that preserved on paper. You stick them to paper, they stick by themselves to paper, they're dry. And he said he needed to scan them and upload them. And he asked if I wanted to help. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I mean, what else could I be doing as a 19-year-old in summer? So I did that. And just as I was doing it, I started recognizing the seaweeds when I saw them again. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at this actually. So I might just continue.
Oh,
and that was that.
Yeah. So in terms of your research then, how does it help us as a community? You know, you're looking at the different species, they do help in terms of the sea, but how does it help us who are not of water?
So when we build an artificial structure on the coast, now obviously the artificial structure has benefits to coastal communities. It's there for defense against rising sea levels. It's there to prevent coastal erosion or all of these things. But when we do that, we are replacing natural shore, and we're removing the biodiversity that the natural shore offers. And that biodiversity has benefits to coastal communities, especially if we're talking about fishing communities, where they obviously gain a lot from the ocean. It's also in the sense of aesthetics. Communities generally don't react as well to an artificial structure as they do to a natural shore. They don't like walking along an artificial structure. They don't like visiting it to look at the sea. So by adding things to an artificial structure that might help it support more biodiversity. So we're talking things like artificial rock pools. We have these vertipools that are made by a company called Ecology, and we just stick them onto the wall and they retain water. So those attract people to the artificial structure. They're a point of interest, and they also increase biodiversity. They'll attract, hopefully, communities of fish to the artificial structure.
Okay. So if we've got more fish, then we eat very well in terms of offshore, in terms of species as well. I can see where you're going with that. So just for the audience, what does biodiversity mean in terms of marine biology?
So a higher biodiversity would mean more species and more of each species.
Right. So what does biodiversity mean? I understand when you're saying in terms of this fish and there's more species, right? But what does the word mean itself in simple syntax?
So we're just talking biodiversity, a higher diversity of biology. So just more different types of fish, more different types of seaweed, and of each of those different types of fish, you've got more individuals.
Okay. So that's what I was trying to ascertain.
We got there in the end.
Yeah, we got there at the end. But in terms of your work then, is it aimed at government or policy writers? Whom is it aimed at?
So I work as part of, in kind of collaboration with EcoStructure, which is this project between Ireland and Wales. It's an EU-funded project. And the point of EcoStructure is to find ways to adapt artificial structures to a climate change scenario to make them more able to support biodiversity. They're doing lots of great things, and I'll drop you the link to the website after this. EcoStructure's outputs are aimed primarily at policymakers and stakeholders, so coastal engineers, people who are making the artificial structures, and people who are planning for them. But we also have a focus on social science. So we're looking at how communities react to the artificial structures and how they react in particular to modified artificial structures with artificial rock pools on them. Or we also have these concrete tiles with different textures that we'd stick onto the seawall. And they attract species, but they also look different. They're a point of interest for people. Okay.
So if they're attracting species, for example, do you have some that keep, well, sharks aren't really bad in a way, but they can damage a lot. So do you have some that keep the sharks away from mainland sea? Or
are you talking about sharks specifically, or just bad?
I'm just thinking, I'm scared of sharks, and I'm just thinking if you've got something like that and it's attracting a lot of fish, you've got whales, you've got sharks, or am I just going out on a limb here and being extra?
Well, I wouldn't expect it to attract sharks more than usual,
What's more than usual?
No, not more than the regular amount of sharks.
Yeah.
We did have a question about invasive species. So these are species, fish or whatever they might be, that are brought to Ireland from another country. They're not native, they don't regularly occur here. And then they proliferate and they disrupt our local kind of marine community.
Yeah.
Because there aren't any checks and balances for them here. So, and we wondered,
who brings them in? Sorry, before you continue.
So they can be brought in a number of ways. They can be brought in through ballast water in ships. They can attach to the hulls of ships. They can be aquarium releases. So if they're brought in for aquariums, then they're just released into the sea. So there's a whole different bunch of ways. We had a question on whether artificial structures that are modified might attract more invasive species than native species. But so far, that hasn't been the case. Like through our studies, we haven't found that more invasive species are on the artificial structures than native species, especially not in the artificial rock pools, which I'm working on.
Okay, so in terms of the sea then, are you planning to move to a different sea after when you finish your PhD in Ireland, to maybe go to, is it the Indian Ocean or sea or whatever it is, or are you content where you are?
I kind of hope to go to Australia eventually, because that's where all the big marine stuff happens. And yeah, there's so many great research institutions in Australia and New Zealand.
Okay.
And, you know, obviously the sea is amazing there and I'd love to go there. So that's the aim, but that's like probably a distant aim.
Okay, so let's put that as an action plan. So the aim is to go to Australia or New Zealand. I like that. So in terms of anybody that's thinking to, you know, I want to look at fish, for example, or I want to look at, I don't know what the species are in terms of the water. What advice would you give them based on your story with your previous tutor or supervisor? What advice would you give them?
So, well, it helps to live near the sea, but if you don't, that shouldn't be a barrier. You know, if you're really interested in looking at marine stuff, then you can start by just going to the sea, having a look at what there is, trying to identify it. There's a whole bunch of really good seashore guides that help. You can also get involved in citizen science projects. Those are really good.
Okay.
So I don't know of any specifically geared towards the sea right now.
Yeah.
But I know there have been. And other than that, you know, just, I don't want to say use your free time to do these things, because you shouldn't have to. But if you're interested, it helps. And like if you're having fun doing it, yeah.
Yeah, why not? I think, you know, in terms of that point there, if you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work, even if it's your free time, because you're doing something you love. So crack on and get it done. It's just as simple as that. So in terms of publications then, are you thinking to publish more, or do you want to work in industry and teach? What are your plans in terms of future, as you've mentioned about New Zealand and Australia?
So I definitely want to continue in, you know, academia and all this, do a postdoc or whatever. So publications are the aim. Apart from the one paper that I've already got published, we should have another 2 in preparation. So I'm drafting them. I'm waiting for the data to come in, and then I'll analyze and kind of send it off. And after that, you know, apply for postdocs and hope for the best. Well,
good luck with that. So in terms of when it comes to PhD life, we all deal with stress, you know, in different ways. And we know that now in terms of mental health, stress is like the push of all things. So how do you manage your stress levels in terms of your day-to-day?
Well, I let myself be kind of flexible in terms of my routine. So I wouldn't generally work like a strict 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Yeah. I've always worked kind of task-based rather than time-based. Yeah. So I'll say today I got to get this done. And if I get it done by noon, then I'll leave and go home, because there's no point in trying to push myself.
Job's done. Jobs are good and that's it.
And then if I wake up on a Saturday and I feel like I want to work, I'll work. But then if the following Tuesday, for example, I'm just tired and exhausted, and I can sense myself being on the edge of kind of like that cracking you get as a PhD student. Yes. Then I'll be like, today I'll just stay home and forget about everything, because it's pointless trying to push through it and then produce work that's not up to your own standard.
No, that's true. I agree with that. So in terms of your task then, how do you prioritize for you to know this is priority, this isn't at this moment in time, just as a skill for those who may be struggling and think everything is priority? How do you prioritize?
Well, I do struggle with that. Not in terms of thinking everything is priority. Like I know what's priority. I just
Yeah.
kind of sometimes not want to do it and have kind of smaller tasks that I'll say, oh, I've got to do these first. I've got to finish these first, even though I really don't. But I would usually prioritize based on deadlines.
Right.
So if I have a big deadline coming up, like a submission for a conference, then that would be top priority. And then for things which don't have strict deadlines, it can be harder, like paper submissions. You can submit a paper whenever you want. Yes. But because that is so important to your career as a scientist, publishing papers, and that would always be top priority for me, like working on a paper. If I have what I need to push the paper through, then that's going to be at the top of my list.
Okay, so for somebody who's still maybe in their first year, going into second year or second year, and they haven't yet published, could you just explain why it is very important for them to publish, a journal or maybe a chapter in a book? Maybe that's later, but in terms of publications, why are they so important for a scientist?
So just like in industry and in the working world, work experience and achieving courses and certifications are judged as important. That's how they'll hire you. In the academic world, publications are the major metric by which they judge the quality of candidates for a particular role. And it can be difficult to publish papers, extremely difficult.
Yes.
But you can usually get at least one from your PhD.
Yeah.
And quite apart from it being, the metric by which they will judge your quality, it shows that you have planned an experiment, executed an experiment, and successfully communicated it to your peers. Yeah. So you've kind of achieved what it is to be a scientist in publishing a paper.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I guess in terms of from the peer review side, could you explain what a peer review in your field is like? And because I've had feedback where some are rather hurt in terms of the feedback that they do get, and some are rather happy. So in your field and what you've gone through in your own words, how would you describe that process?
So, when you submit a paper, it comes back with reviews from generally 3 different people: reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3. And, there's a lot of memes about reviewer 2 and reviewer 2's feedback. And it can be quite accurate, because I do generally find that one reviewer will have a good view of the paper. Another reviewer will, be fairly neutral and want the paper to go through anyway. But there's always one reviewer that doesn't like the paper in any sense. Like there's nothing about the paper that is good.
Yes.
And then I suppose it's up to you to decide what you want to take from the reviews. You don't have to. I think there's this misconception that you have to change everything based on what the reviewers tell you, but you don't have to. Like if one of the reviewers makes a comment that you disagree with based on how you've done the experiment or how you've written the paper, then you are, fully at liberty to write back in your response to reviewers, explain why you disagree and why you've decided to keep it the way that you wrote it. And then it'll be up to the editor or up to the reviewer themselves to decide that, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, actually, still. So really, your reaction to reviews is determined by yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to take them personally.
I think that's a fine line. If I've spent hours and hours working on something and someone comes back and says, this is rubbish, you didn't think about this, it's painful, It
is, yeah.
I'll drop a tear or two, it is painful. So that's
I I say you don't have to take them personally. I've definitely taken them personally, like
Yeah.
every single time.
It's because it is a lot of hard work. And I guess what we're saying to everybody that's watching is, if you feel you've hit rock bottom, you can go and speak to the mental health at your university to assist you, because there's no need for you to sit at home and go through depression over one person's opinion. As you've rightly explained there, Veronica, that you can respond back and articulate the reasons why you think you should have done it the way you've done it, and that you shouldn't change it again. And if they still disagree, you can always try again, I guess, and see what happens from there. But you're not the first person nor the last person. It will always happen, basically, in that order. So in terms of yourself, Veronica, do you have any parting words for our guests today?
Well, I suppose, if you want to do marine research, then go to the sea, have a look. Don't let anyone stop you. Don't let anyone dissuade you. Because, I'm from Malta and I ended up in Ireland, and everybody told me that students from Malta don't necessarily get preferred because it's a fairly unknown university.
Yeah.
So for scholarship purposes, they're not really ranked very high, but it doesn't matter where you're from. You can, if you work at it, then, you can do what you want to do.
You've just touched on a point there. I know I said we're coming to the end. In terms of the scholarship process coming from Malta to Ireland, what is the process like? Is it a difficult process or is it quite simple?
So my scholarship process wasn't straightforward, and not for Ireland in particular, but in general. And I like highlighting this actually because I think it's very important as to highlight our failures as well as our successes, so that people who come after us don't just look at our successes and think my failures are just, they aren't acceptable. They're, for every one success, there's like 20 failures behind it that we hide. So I wanted to get out of Malta to do my PhD, and I applied to at least 12 different scholarship programs, like across the world: Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Germany. I was even thinking towards the end, when I hadn't gotten any of them, I was thinking of, okay, I'll do the GREs and try and apply for the USA and see if I can get in there. And then my master's supervisor sent me an email where somebody from Ireland, my current supervisor, was advertising for a PhD student for a project, the EcoStructure project. And he said, you should apply for this because you work on artificial structures, so this is your thing. And I applied and I interviewed and I came second. So I didn't even get that.
Wow.
And Taz, my supervisor, my current supervisor, emailed me and said, look, you came second, but we really like you. So would you consider applying for this scholarship, the Irish government scholarship, the IRC, and then you can come and work with us. And at that point I was thinking, so here's another, because it had been so many times of like applying to Australia, and the supervisors, for example, would be like, okay, you didn't get this scholarship, here's another scholarship you can apply for. And it's not their fault. No. They wanted me there, but it was difficult.
Yeah.
And then I applied for the IRC, was absolutely certain I wouldn't get it because everybody made it out to be this like really prestigious. And it is very difficult to get. It is documented that the success rates are very low. But I applied for it and then I got it, and here I am. So this was like maybe the 20th thing I applied for. So, definitely not first time lucky.
Yeah. No, what you've highlighted there is that you have to be dedicated and resilient no matter what the outcome is. Even though everybody was saying this is quite difficult, you still went ahead, even though you've been disappointed so many times, and still applied. And like you said, here you are. So basically, for everybody out there, do not give up. It doesn't matter how many times you have to apply. Just keep at it. One person will know that you're worth, in a sense, and they will do anything to ensure that you go through the process. But if it's a no, you try again, you keep trying and trying, essentially. So no, thank you very much for answering my question. So in terms of today then, we've come to an end. In terms of everybody out there, please don't forget to share, like and subscribe and share with your auntie, uncle, pets, everybody. Literally, we need more subscribers, turn on your notifications and leave some feedback so we can improve and do better in terms of dialogue. So Veronica, what made you come on PhD Hard Talk?
So you reached out to me on Twitter, and as soon as I saw it, I thought this is such a good idea, because I think I mentioned this is something that I wanted to do when I started my PhD. I thought we don't really have communication among ourselves as PhD students. A PhD is a very isolating thing. You're working on your own research. And especially, for example, in my case, I'm the only PhD student in my lab. There's nobody to get it. Everybody's wrapped up in their own little experiment bubble. So this is something I wanted to do. I was thinking of, we should do like a video series, or like a TV show would be great about PhD students. And then I saw your Twitter message and I thought, this is great. This is exactly the sort of thing that we should be doing. And more people should watch this kind of thing.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your response. So remember, hashtag project dissemination to the world. Let's get our voices heard and let's share our research in a harmonious way. Thank you very much, Veronica, for your time today.
Thank you.